We're very pleased to have two individuals that can tell us two different stories within the justice community of how the insurgence and the need for technology not only was brought to bear, but then what are those challenges that were addressed and what were the accomplishments that still resonate today? And frankly, where are those repeatable processes that in the future we might be able to share with other communities and other silos? So we have Judge Samuel A. Thumma, who's from the Arizona Court of Appeals Division, and we have Kiron Bose, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Issured. Issured is one of the members of the IGES family, a contributor in many ways, and certainly has the experience to speak to, in this case, the law enforcement community. So we're going to start with Kiron. Each of the individuals will not only introduce themselves by way of a little bit of background so that we understand a little bit about their talent, their skills, their understanding of the space, but then go into their review of the experiences or the project that they're chatting with us about. And then Judge Thumma will follow with that same sort of litany, his background, his experiences, and those lessons learned. So I will ask Kiron to join us over here at the podium, or join me, and I'm going to get all my stuff out of the way, and the clicker is right there.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kiron Bose. I'm the COO of Issured Limited. So we are a company based out of the UK that focuses on delivering digital transformation projects for law enforcement in the UK at a national level and also at the local level as well. So we've been engaged with that for about the past decade. An element of that is around what we call public contact. So how we use digital technology to engage with communities in a better way, how we respond to the ask of our public and our communities around offering services on an online platform to be able to align with society in the way that society is going around digital engagement. Now, part of that program was a tool called StreetSafe, which I'll give a little background to the context of why that StreetSafe tool was developed and why we got involved in it. And then I'll go on to talk a little bit about the technology and how we're using it and the value that comes out of that. So let me just build the slide here. So RASO, rape and serious sexual offences in England is a massive problem for us. Has been for a number of years. We've done some analytics around that to work out why that problem is. There's some statistics up there that are quite shocking when we went through the data that came back. 1.3% charge rate. So any incident that's reported to the police in a RASO context, only 1.3% of those is charged. And that's for a number of reasons, the two core ones being lack of evidence. So they tend to be what one person says against another person, and also victim dropout rates. So the process in the UK around prosecuting these and investigating these is really intense and lengthy. We take away digital devices, we spend ages downloading that data, we go through intrusively through that data to try and find evidential patterns within that device that's coming through. That leads to victim dropout. Now, the really shocking statistic is that one at the bottom, where we're saying that 5.8% is the number of offences committed by a single offender. 5.8% reoffending. So as you can imagine, as that dropout rate, that 1.3% of people not being charged on that, they will go on to commit a further 4.8 incidents of RASO offences. It's a shocking statistic. So this spurned off a load of work around data analytics to really understand what the causes for that were. Now, in 2021, Sarah Everard was having a drink around a friend's house. She walked home 2.5 miles from her home, back to home. During that journey, she was kidnapped. She was driven to the south coast of England, raped and murdered. A week later, Wayne Couzens was arrested. He is or was a serving Metropolitan Police Service officer and was prosecuted and charged and is now quite rightly locked up in jail and serving his time. Now, that case got a huge amount of publicity, as you can imagine, not least because of the hideous nature of the offence itself, but the fact it was a serving officer that committed it and was charged. So in the UK, there's a huge public outcry on it. Internationally, I think it got some public publicity as well. That sparked off a review internally within the law enforcement community within the UK and also in the Home Office to look at how we deal with protection, prevention and response to rape and sexual assaults and also domestic abuse cases. That then led to something called VORG, Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, that was released by the Home Office late in 2021. Now, the key driver of that, given the nature of investigating these crimes is very difficult on the whole, the focus of that turned to prevention. So how do we get to a position where we can start preventing these offences happening? Are there things that we can do proactively to help that prevention measures to be put in place? Out of that was born something called Street Safe, which is a sentiment analysis tool that was developed to the general public. So it allows the public to report areas where they feel unsafe in their communities directly into the police anonymously. So there's no data held, personal data held. You don't have to give your name as part of that. It's all anonymous in that data set. Police then are using that really effectively, which will show some of the benefits a bit later on, to reduce the amount of crime and actually to work in those communities a bit better. So what's the tool all about? So the tool splits into two areas. The first one is the community engagement tool. So how does the general public actually start engaging that and providing the data? Well, it's through a very simple tool set delivered online and also available on applications as well. So effectively, here's some screenshots that you see here. Member of public goes on, they can drop a pin or put an address on a certain area they have concerns on, and they answer a series of really simple structured questions that look at either environmental issues like poor lighting, behavioural issues, gangs hanging around on street corners or some antisocial behaviour happening, and the demographic information. So what age group are you, what sexual orientation are you, that kind of stuff is collected through. That data then is submitted in. We store that at a national level in a single system, and that is all anonymous. So we store no personal data within that system. So really simple tool, takes about a minute and a half to complete, and that's open to every single member of the public in the UK. The second part of that is data analytics. So it's all very well collecting this data, but what do we do with it? How do we inform policing strategies? How do we get that in front of officers that really need it? Well, we've developed a very simple set of Power BI dashboards that are available to every single officer in the UK. So everyone has access to that. Every force has access to it. And what they can do is go in here and start comparing that with crime data that we've loaded in. So we've anonymised a whole load of crime data ranging back 5 years into that system, and we're now doing that analysis across those two things. And the reason why we do that is to try and show patterns between where sentiment of public feeling, do I feel unsafe in a certain area, compares with crime data, so actual factual data. And is there something there that we can do around prevention to start stopping that? Forces can cut that by any means. They can cut it by the actual report that comes in, so either environmental, demographic or behavioural, and also can cut it by geography as well. And that's at a national or a local force level and even into the boroughs as well. So quite a powerful set of dashboards there that data can be split and cut in different ways. A little bit on the technical architecture side of it for those that are technical here. It is fully integrated solutions, so both the community tool and the analytics tool are all integrated into one product set. It's secured and loaded onto MS Azure in our police estate. That package can be lifted and installed into any other Azure estate that we need to. It uses the Power Suite tool set to deliver some of the data set on top of that. We have an APIs as well developed, so forces have two options to interact with the data. They either do it through the dashboard, they can download the data from that Power BI dashboard, or they can consume an API to do that straight into their analytical systems and combine it with other data that they have. So it's quite an open architecture in terms of data sharing and being able to get that data across. It is configurable as well. So we're talking here about Street Safe and the community engagement around safety. The whole tool is very configurable. So we're actually starting to look at doing different survey data into that. We can configure that tool set to be able to capture whatever data that we want in there. And in fact, we're starting now to use it to get some information around how public use social media to engage with policing, to inform some of the technology development we're doing in that area. As I say, it's available as an app in Google and Play Store. Now, the key thing here was done in 6 weeks. So from initial concept coming through from the Home Office around the VORG strategy to it getting released and being operational was 6 weeks. So these sort of things don't have to take time. There's very simple solutions to put in there. It's a relatively simple solution that allows forces to interact with that data and allows to engage those communities very quickly and effectively. So what's the value out of it? So what are we hearing from the people that are using this? Well, a number of forces are using it as a precursor to be able to allow them to patrol areas a bit differently. So British Transport Police are responsible for all the stations, UK rail stations and transport network within the UK. They're using it to target patrol areas within their stations to make it a safer place based on the returns they're seeing from Street Safe. Metropolitan Police Service is obviously, as you guys know, I think, is the largest police force in the UK. They've actually used it to target an operation to stop violence against women and girls, so they use that data to inform that operation. Interestingly, one of the constabularies, and I think this is true across a number of forces, are using it to work with their local councils. So that's our local governments that have money to spend on their local environments, to allow them then to make those changes that are needed, to add in street lighting, install CCTV where it's needed, cut back bushes, you know, the kind of gardening thing on alleyways. That kind of stuff is being used, and they're doing that in partnership together with the law enforcement agency. But I think most important is that top right-hand, left-hand as you're looking at it, statistic, which is in some of the boroughs in London, so we've targeted 4 boroughs across that. Off that 12 months, we've seen a 9% drop in domestic abuse and the violence against women related crime types. So it's making a real difference, this, and it's just a way that, you know, very simply we can start engaging with the public, we can start collecting information from the public and our communities, start using that data to inform policing decisions to allow our communities to become much safer and feel a bit more comfortable in the communities they live in. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of what we've done in that. Obviously, we'll be taking questions later, and I'll be around tonight anyway if there's any further questions you want to go into a bit more detail in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is powerful stuff, and thank you, Kiron, for sharing that. To be able to do things in 6 weeks, to get a deliverable, is extraordinary. I'm going to talk a little bit about some access to justice efforts, but it is easy in that world to get inundated and overwhelmed because there is no one silver bullet that's going to fix things. And so by definition, you are looking to nibble around the margins. And sometimes using years to do that. So to do what you did in 6 weeks, I applaud you. That's fabulous. My name's Sam Thumma. I'm from Arizona. I am on the Court of Appeals Division 1 there. My presentation will be, I think, something kind of completely different because I come at it from the judge side of things. I am the least technically able person in this room, I guarantee you, because I'm the least technically able person in most rooms, and this is a really technically able room. I was a trial judge for 5 years, first on juvenile, which is for 3 years, which is a major rotation in our court system, and then 2 years on criminal, presiding over about 35 felony trials to verdict. I've been on the Court of Appeals now for about 11 years, so I haven't been a working judge for 11 years, right? Because it's the trial judges that do the real work in the court system, and I have the privilege of working with them on some of the things I'm going to talk about today. And if I was a trial judge, I couldn't be here because I'd be calling cases in my courtroom, right? So I'm happy to be here, and have been delighted by the presentations earlier in the day that I've seen. I have a fairly short attention span, light attention on detail, and if you're encumbered with those two defects, you can do quite a lot of things, or at least make people think you've done quite a lot of things. I came to the table that affects what we're talking about here when I sat on the Records Retention Task Force for our state, which looked at how long we need to keep things, and the right answer was never everything forever. That arose when we started keeping things electronically, right? So that's kind of the baptism. Then I chaired a digital evidence task force in 2017, had the delight to stumble into David Jackson and case lines at the Court Technology Conference in Salt Lake City, and referenced that effort in a paper that I'll talk about in just a little bit. Then fast forward to COVID. So I chaired or co-chaired actually Arizona's Coping with COVID task force, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I currently chair Arizona's Commission on Access to Justice, and that's why I am here. The large focus of that is civil access to justice, given the way funding and grant restrictions are handled, but it's access to justice across the board. And then the least fun task force of the state that I chaired was keeping the record by electronic means. If court reporters weren't available, what could we do? We did that in 2019. That became pretty important when COVID hit. And the court reporters on that group didn't much like anything that we did because technology, it's a hard job and technology's kind of eaten them up. They're not there yet. And I also have the privilege of serving on the Court Technology Committee, the kind of mishmash of National Center and National Organization crews, and I'm delighted to do that. So, all right, so let's look at prehistory. Way back in 2017, we were musing about this concept of a digital evidence portal, right? A way you could bring documents across the court threshold in the same format, like with body-worn camera images, that they'd been kept always. Well, until 2017 and beyond, in the United States, not Great Britain, but in the United States, the only way to do that was to load it onto a CD-ROM or put it on a thumb drive, even though it had never existed in one of those forms before. Why couldn't we do better? Why couldn't we do better? And that's what we talked about in this task force report, the digital evidence court portal concept. Hold that memory in your mind, because that was all 6 years ago, right? Prehistory. Well, we worked on that concept internally, like any good court system, right? We would look internally to see what we could do, but we also looked externally to see what was out there. And technology advances really came along. There was a product called Case Lines that didn't exist in the United States in October of 2017, but it sure did in Great Britain. And then it came here, and they affiliated with Thomson Reuters in 2020, and then Thomson Reuters purchased them. Well, then COVID came. COVID came, right? March 2020, and people have to take things digitally in the court, or they're going to have to shut their doors. And we did all sorts of stuff that you tech types would shriek in horror about. We took things electronically, email messages, attachments to email messages that we open on the court system. Not a very good way to do things, right? But I hope on our very best days, courts are trying to help people solve problems. And that's what the heroes in our trial courts, not me, but the heroes in the trial courts did to try to keep the doors open, to try to allow decisions and disputes to be resolved. So we then, the court system in Arizona did affiliate with Case Lines. We had a pilot in 2020. In December of 2020, when things were still largely being, meetings were remote. Remember that pretty dark time when many of us were pretty monastic in our approach to how we dealt with things. And we had volunteers. We had rural judges saying, hey, Thumma, can you put me in the front of the line to be involved in this pilot? They didn't know I had no control over that, but I was happy to forward that inquiry along to our Chief Justice. It expanded to selected courts, including very urban courts, Maricopa County, 160 judicial officers, fourth largest trial court system in the United States. And Mojave County, one of the most rural counties that you're going to see, very diffuse, has land north of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. I am told if you live in Colorado City, which is a city of about 5,000 people, to get to the nearest Superior Court courthouse in that county, you have to drive 4.5 hours one way through 2 other states, right? So maybe use of technology has some value with a court like that. Phased rollout, we've got a resource page if you're interested, and I hope you are. Well, then COVID hits. COVID actually had hit before. Our Chief Justice in March of 2020 says, hey, we're keeping the courts open to the best we can. Created, and it's got this long title, the Arizona COVID-19 Continuity of Court Operations During Public Health Emergency Work Group. Let's just call it Plan B, because that's what we called it. Plan A left town when COVID hit, and we're trying to do the very best we could. We met a whole bunch of times. Wednesday, the trial judge's lunch hour, 12:15 to 1:15, because they get 90 minutes, because you have to powder your nose and eat some food in between court breaks. And I thought it was going to be like a tour of the morgue, because these were the people in the front lines of dealing with COVID in jam-packed jury, waiting rooms, jury commissioner rooms, high volume dockets where people were waiting in very close quarters to see the court. It was so inspirational and delightful. because it was information sharing. I heard somebody compare it to, one homeless person telling another homeless person where the food kitchen was, right? To get something really good, something that would sustain you, and it was. We then wrote some white papers. I'm going to talk just a little bit about a few of these best practice recommendations. Jury management, how do you deal with juries in this unprecedented time? Protocol, what happens when somebody's exposed in the courthouse or somebody presents that's symptomatic? Then remember the time when we never thought vaccinations were going to come along, and they did? Well, we had to deal with those as well. They created issues. And then our final report in June of 2021, we published that right here in the state of Texas in the SMU Law Review Forum. It included 3 surveys that we did, one of the judicial branch in Arizona, one of the state bar members, and one of the public at large. Apparently, they still do those telephone interviews of like 500 randomized people. I don't know how they get the phone numbers, but they do. And all 3 of those surveys focused largely on technology. And all 3 of them, the results pointed the same direction. Courts should use technology. There are efficiencies in technology. We want more technology. For the public, we have technology right now. Why don't you as the courts do that? Why is it I can have great justice from 8:30 to noon or 1:30 to 4:30, weekends, evenings excluded, holidays excluded? Why don't we try to expand our reach? Good feedback for us all. So we have expanded use of technology. Remote hearings, we'll talk about that just a little bit with the remote evidence. What are the challenges of that? Well, digital divide. Arizona is a pretty both intensely populated and diffusely populated, depending on where you are. A ton of rural areas. Hardware, we need some new hardware. Personnel skills. My bailiff, who was very good at dealing with jurors and was multilingual, would not be so hot if it came to being a bailiff to deal with a Zoom room. I'm telling you, that just wouldn't happen. It's a different skill set. Training, education, special user needs. How do you have somebody tell somebody they need to log on at 10:30 on Tuesday for a hearing with their behavioral health issue case, right? How do we deal with that? That's a new issue. Change, court system is not always so good at effectuating or welcoming change. I know that sounds as a shock, and I know I'm being recorded, but it's true. So we gotta work through that. And then funding and other challenges as well. But how about some benefits, huh? Let's focus on the good stuff. Increased productivity for attorneys and parties. That came through the survey responses from the attorneys we got. Case management tools. Courts have additional options to improve the court experience for others. Jurors, if they're not going to serve, they may not have to appear if they fill out the survey and say they're going on vacation the next day, so they can avoid that 4.5-hour one-way trip to the court to say, Judge, I'm on vacation tomorrow, and then get back in the car and drive home. Adopt what the rest of the world is doing. Anybody ever heard of something called Netflix? Yeah, right. I mean, I have 2, and it's pretty. How about Amazon? Anybody use Amazon? We're never going to equate that, but maybe we should look and see what we can learn from that. We're not going to be cutting edge, but maybe we can be best in show. And then how courts serve the public, including expanding access to justice. Now, I neglected to mention that I will, when we're done here today, be a published artist, okay? So one of the slides that I'm going to show has artwork that I did, and anybody that can identify it, just please raise your hand and we'll kind of go from there. But before we get there, remote hearings, the Supreme Court said, hey, we've been using remote hearings for a while. Can you, Plan B, get together and make some recommendations on what we should continue going forward, recognizing we don't want the courts to simply go back to what it was in January of 2020, where everybody got a chance to wait in line to see the judge. Maybe we can use remote hearings going forward. We made those recommendations. The court adopted them. The courts throughout the state have adopted them as of October 1, 2022. The resources referenced there are available online, and stated too simply, unless there's contested evidentiary things that are going to happen, the presumption is those hearings might be remote. And when contested evidentiary things need to happen, the presumption is that they ought to be in person. Now, that's oversimplified, and local court on a case has an opportunity to override that presumption as well. All right, now, does anybody think they can identify the original artwork that I did? I don't see any hands. All right, so I just want to, at the risk of defending, no one paid a lot of money for the design work here, but let me annotate what this shows. Maricopa County Justice Courts, there are 26 of them in the county of Maricopa. They're the limited jurisdiction justice courts where you hear debt collection, misdemeanors, initial appearances, and most importantly, perhaps for some people, evictions, right? Pre-COVID, you had to appear personally for your initial appearance for eviction. And there's at least one of these courthouses that has no public transportation, right? So the high point in July of 2019 is almost 40% failure to appear by the respondent. So 2 in 5 times when somebody said you're not supposed to sleep anymore in maybe the crappy apartment that you're in, you've got to go live in a car or somewhere else, they didn't show. Why they didn't show, a million reasons, but one thing I know is they didn't win if they didn't show, right? Well, COVID, my beautiful artwork, my published artwork now, COVID hit March, it's the green line, March of 2020. Failure to appear rate that month was about 30%, so 3 in 10. But then you could appear remotely, first by phone and then remote appearance by Zoom or Teams or whatever platform was being used. And 2020 kind of went up and down, but the numbers for evictions were kind of strange because the CARES Act had a whole bunch of stays. Remember, evictions weren't happening. And then 2021 is the pink line, and that actually trended up, which worried me, right? But then 2022, the blue line in there, and if you're colorblind, my annotation must really be powerful, and I apologize if anybody here is colorblind. But the average rate for failure to appear in those same cases, in those same courts, hard numbers, was less than 25%, right? So a peak of about 40 to an average for an entire year of about 1 in 4. I would submit there is a huge access to justice component of just that one change. Now, are those people going to win? I don't know. Probably a lot of them aren't. But their case is going to be resolved on the merits. And I think that has extraordinary value. One final number that I will toss out to you as an imponderable to me. In family court in Maricopa County Superior Court, fully 90% of the cases, so divorce proceedings, fully 90% of those cases has at least one party who is self-represented, right? So only about 10% of the cases both have attorneys on both sides. We have allowed electronic filing in family court for kind of a while, right? Lawyers have to use it, absent something really strange, and by that for motions and complaints and other things. But for self-represented parties, about 65% of the time, they don't use electronic filing. Why? That's troubling to me because it's designed to allow them to make it work so they don't have to find childcare and transportation and parking, which is no mean feat, and take time off work to come down and toss something across a filing counter. I don't know the answer. Jeff Fine, the clerk of court in Maricopa County Superior Court, doesn't know the answer either. But we're going to look pretty hard. It strikes me there's something that isn't quite singing on the technology that we might be able to improve. And I think that's an aspect of access to justice as well. Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for including me, and happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Kiron. I do like your artwork. I wasn't able to see it really well, but this is a better perspective. That being said, I know that the several individuals will have questions for you, but I would like to just ask, for either one of the programs, did it reach the arrival stage that codified material so that it either has any evaluation components, any metrics, and/or any repeatable guidelines?
Let me start. You know, a lot of what I was talking about is sort of several things at once, and one is a response to COVID, which was sort of emergency. We had to do that. We had to accelerate technology adoption in weeks or sometimes days that would have taken probably our branch a decade to do. And so if there's one silver lining for COVID, and I'm not a big champion of the beast, that's probably it. But we need to keep tracking tracking things like this. We need to figure out, and there are more statistics for this year, preliminary statistics for the Maricopa County Justice Courts. We need to look at other things, agency administration proceedings, Office of Administrative Hearings, things like that, where a whole bunch of cases that we never see are addressed. So yes, but we need to do a whole bunch more.
Understood. And I think that's great. Kiron?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Sam was saying there, actually. So we were driven by, obviously, the 2021 incident there and the drive from Home Office to do something around VORG. And that 6 weeks was really driven through the necessity to do something, to respond and do something very quickly with that. But what that's actually given us is the program that we did it for, and us as a company have got a little bit of reputation now of being able to turn things around very quickly, to not overcomplicate things, to actually just give what is needed, understand the requirement, actually respond to that. And that's a bit of blueprint that we've taken across a number of different programs and projects, actually. And a number of other areas of the government are now picking that up. It's kind of more of an agile type approach to it, but in agile in a way that delivers results. So yeah, there's kind of a number of lessons and kind of templating, reuse elements that we can pick up and use.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, again, many of the conversations that we've already had here this week speak to what are the replicatable processes and/or projects and/or lessons learned that we could promulgate, right? And on the one hand, it's not as heavy a lift. That doesn't mean that we don't want to get to that more formal evaluation components that could have a greater weight depending upon what we're asking for, if there's funding needs that are sometimes associated with it. But for agencies that are looking to accomplish the same thing, thankfully not in the same emergent circumstances that we were a couple of years ago, but in order to progress, in order to improve their circumstances, there are some commitments that are just intuitive.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the reasons why this chart kind of exists is I was on a panel with Access to Justice chairs, and there's some academics saying, well, we don't know whether failure-to-appear rates really changed by remote appearances. And they kind of hated remote appearances because they talked to some public defenders, and they said, here's some reasons that we think remote appearances are bad. Do you agree? And then the defender said, sure. And then they reached out and talked to them some more. That's a caricature. But I thought, there is hard data on failure-to-appear rates, and don't tell me we don't know. We should be able to measure that, right? And I don't know if the numbers were going to be good or bad. I'm delighted they appear to be good, but we ought to track that.
Exactly. And that's huge for all audiences. So questions from the audience? Bonnie?
Kiron, so the stats are amazing. How are you driving, or how is adoption being driven to promote this in the UK? And then where do you see the technology going from here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for not asking me to sing. I appreciate that.
You gave her the question. Of course she asked it. No, I'm only kidding.
It's kind of a multi-pronged approach, really. So forces themselves are promoting this. As soon as we release this, the forces themselves are going out to their communities. They're using the social media channels. They're pushing it on whatever media they have to communicate with the public. That got us so far. The biggest thing was actually seeing results. So the general public seeing results of what that data was telling policing. So they were seeing their communities change in terms of lighting being installed or extra patrols getting on the streets and seeing that visible policing presence. And from that, it also then it kind of almost organically grows from there. So once you get that reputation, that then gets passed on to other members of the public. It then becomes an organically growing thing. So at the minute, we've got a huge amount of engagement with this. We're looking to evolve it all the time. So we're looking at the data and seeing, actually, do you know what else would be useful to policing, and how do we adapt and evolve it? So that kind of talks to the configurable point of the tool, that we can change it very quickly and we can adapt to whatever we're seeing in that environment. So yeah, it's kind of the organic growth is by far the most powerful and the strongest way of doing it than any publicity you can give.
Thank you. David?
And another question for Kiron. You described as being very much focused on violence against women and girls, but are you seeing it bringing in data that helps reduce other crimes, burglary, car theft, drugs dealing?
Yeah, this wasn't scripted, by the way, in between two Brits, but Yeah, we are. So it was launched on the Vogue banner. Actually, we're seeing probably 40% of that isn't women and girls reporting. It's other areas of communities coming in. And we accommodate for multiple crime types. So it's not just those that are relating to domestic violence or domestic abuse. So yeah, we're seeing that data come in. Again, that's informing policing strategies and prevention strategies as well.
Excellent. Other questions? Please.
I think that 25% is because people don't have technology to submit.
What we have perhaps what we've focused on is the reduction down to 25%. I'm still not delighted by 25%. 25% is a heck of a lot better than 40%. But that's the digital divide and a whole bunch of other confounding things. Undoubtedly a language barrier, right, for some. The thing I kind of like in our state for remote appearances, there are a whole bunch of reasons having nothing to do with an eviction case why people either can't go to court or don't want to go to court, right? If they have immigration issues that are unresolved, the thought of crossing that threshold is kind of a hard task, right? And if we can use remote appearances to figure that one out, maybe that's a help too. So I'm not satisfied with 25%, although I thought about having that graph sort of tattooed on my forearm because it reduced by about a third the failure to appear, and I think that's a good move in the right direction.
Other questions?
Question for Sam. Sam, you said that one of the issues is that people, especially in family courts, are still doing paper filing.
Yeah.
Would it be acceptable for, say, a charitable and not-for-profit that is supporting people to do the filing for them? Would the court allow that?
The question is, can somebody have a facilitator to do electronic filing for them? And the answer is yes. Arizona is with some controversy at the front edge of sort of lawyer-light services, licensed paraprofessionals who can not only help with preparing documents, but also filing them, and then at times appearing in open court for certain types of matters. That's like blasphemy in a lot of sort of jurisdictions, but not in Arizona, not in Utah, and I'm very much happy with that. So there's an opportunity there. What I fear is that the system's more complicated than it should be, that the portal doesn't allow, appropriate saving of intermediate drafts, so you have to start all over again, and that our forms aren't as helpful as they are. We have a self-help manual for our court in English and Spanish, our Court of Appeals. It's 120 pages long. How many people do you think really look at that and get anything from it? And I was chief of the court, right? So, I blame some of the responsibility or bear some of the responsibility and blame, but we speak in a code, and we got to be able to translate that code so self-represented parties can better understand what's expected.
Additional questions? These are perfect examples. Both of these programs are a perfect example of those lessons learned that we can't lose in the process. Now, on the one hand, from the repeatable question that I ask is, what is it that I just can do to help you in these areas? I'll almost propose that working with each of you to publicize and maybe do a case study with you is one of those easy no-brainers that at least starts the process. But are there other either services, support aspects, technical advice, anything else for either of those programs that you think the IGES community can support?
Yes, across the board for IGES, without question. And I'll tell you and I say that a little bit jokingly, but I mean that. And a couple of kind of postscripts. We're trying to communicate broadly so folks are aware of the issues. There's an Access to Justice Commission chairs meeting that happens every year, and it's for far more than chairs. We have a proposal on the Four Corners states, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado, about kind of the digital deserts, and it was accepted, and so we get a chance to present that. And we just last Thursday found out that we'll present at an International Access to Justice Forum on Arizona's experience in October, University of California Irvine's Law School, and we're hoping to replicate those 3 surveys to get kind of horizontal views, how things looked when they were done, ask largely the same questions, maybe supplement it a little bit, and see how people feel now. Have we slipped? Are we even more accepting of technology change in the court? So, but absolutely.
Wonderful. We certainly would want to engage in that. Kiron?
And I think just putting an industry hat on, I think just engage with industry, give them the challenges. We're up for it, as we've kind of shown with some of the stuff we've done in the UK. So come to industry and say, I want something done in 3 weeks. What can you do? Get on with it, or whatever it's going to be. You know, industry is up for the challenge. We'll rise and try and meet that challenge.
Wonderful. Well, know that you have our commitment from the voice. I'm using the reference that one of the speakers did. If you could be our voice, we most certainly will promulgate that information and help you get it out. And the invitation for any other support that you might think of or might need in order to share the lessons learned are certainly ours to provide to you. So I thank the panelists.